people are achieving various levels of success with anxiety as their companion. Welcome to Designed and Delivered for Destiny. I'm your host, Nicole Cherie. I'm a wife, author, life coach, business owner, and speaker. I've been a mental health therapist for over 10 years, and now I want to bring the conversations from my office and bring it to you wherever you are. Each episode, we will discuss various topics related to your design, your deliverance, or your destiny. I'm glad you're taking time out of your busy schedule to tune in. Let's jump on in. This week, we are going to be talking about overcoming anxiety. It's one of those things that is constantly knocking on the door of those who have been chosen. It's the number one mental health issue that everyone is fighting, but will it ever be defeated? So stick around to the end because the answer to that question may surprise you. So anxiety, it's a mental health issue that impacts most people at some point in their life, but it's heavily attached to those who are gifted, are called, and just those who knows there's something within them that needs to be fulfilled. It's usually not so much prevalent when you're dormant and complacent, but as soon as you begin to pursue and go after your calling to try to fulfill that thing that God has placed on your heart, that's why this voice will try to become this pervasive companion throughout your journey. So why does this have so much influence? How can something that's been a problem for so long continue to affect people the same way that it did 100 years ago? Is it because people hid their issues and it's something that they never talked about openly? Is it possible that they just didn't have the insight or the understanding to be able to have these conversations? It seems that the culture and the lack of knowledge, it provided the perfect opportunity for anxiety to increase and become so prevalent in our society. But the good news is that although anxiety predates all of us, it really hasn't evolved much. So we don't have a lot of catching up to do. The tools and the understanding that we now have to address it is more than enough to manage it. But will it ever go away, and can you actually overcome it? Well, let me just say this first. I don't actually believe that everyone wants to overcome it. If you look around, many people are achieving various levels of success with anxiety as their companion. It's true that, many successful people are neurotic or anxious and are driven by fear, and they've learned how to use anxiety as a motivator and just to even mask anxiety in their lives. But is that what you want for the rest of your life? When life hands you a lemon, do you have to make lemonade, or can you hand that lemon back? I thought, and I could be wrong, but I thought the goal was to be whole, to go through life from a place of power and love and a sound mind. I thought the goal was to use divine resources like peace instead of worldly resources like fear. And if you're in agreement with this, let's talk about what does it look like to actually overcome anxiety. But before we unpack this together, I do want to point out that there are some medical causes of anxiety, and what I want to share may not apply to those situations. So we're going to focus on the millions of people who are dealing with anxiety for non-medical reasons. I also want to acknowledge that I'm not talking about the good kind of anxiety that you need when you're walking in front of a car and you need that fear-based response to help you to avoid getting hit. I'm referring to the kind that plagues most people in their everyday lives, which serves no purpose other than to keep people stuck and bound. So let's look at this from the standpoint of the spiritual and the psychological causes, because more often than not, those are the root causes. This topic is really close to my heart because I struggled with anxiety since I was a preteen. And I didn't have the tools to deal with it, so I found ways to numb the feeling or detach myself from the things that were triggering it. What appeared to be stubbornness or avoidance at times was really just overwhelming anxiety that was trapped inside of me with no tools to manage it. It took me from being this person who was very comfortable being the best version of myself as a leader and being put out front, to going to this shell of mediocrity and bondage. It wasn't until I started the journey of learning how to help others with their mental health that I was able to learn how to help myself. And it was a long journey. What I learned in school, it was a great place to start, but it didn't rid me of the anxiety I experienced. Rather, it taught me how to manage it, so I continued to struggle with it in silence. Today, I want to share not only the foundational aspects of what you need to know about anxiety, but some of the things that they don't teach you, which is required to actually overcome anxiety. Okay, so let's just take a minute to look at how anxiety works. I like the way that Dr. Catherine Pittman breaks it down in her book, Rewire Your Anxious Brain. She explains the difference between top-down and bottom-up anxiety. So you may know that your brain is designed with certain parts at the top and others at the bottom. Well, bottom-up anxiety is when something triggers you either subconsciously or through one of your five senses. You're triggered and it causes your body to go into a fight or flight state. So for example, you were bit by a dog as a child. So now every time you see a dog, immediately your body gets into this tense, anxious state, and you just begin to feel unsafe. On the other hand, top-down anxiety involves your thoughts. So what you're thinking about is actually what's triggering your fight or flight response to kick in. So let's say with that dog situation, you find a way to get away from the dog. So your body starts to feel safe and it begins to calm down. But then you start thinking to yourself, but what if it's still there? Or what if it's going to bite me? Or what if all these various things. So your thoughts are now what's sending signals to your brain that something is wrong, putting you back in an anxious state. So generally, people who deal with anxiety are impacted by both top up and bottom down. But most of the time, it's your thoughts that are triggering you. So you can do all the calming exercises you want to get your body to relax, which you should do. But if your mind isn't calm, then you will continue to trigger yourself. Let me answer the question that I posed at the beginning of this podcast, which is, will anxiety ever be defeated? And the answer to that question is not completely, but it can be defeated in your life. Anxiety will always exist, but it doesn't have to be your issue. What does it take to overcome it? Well, there are 5 remedies that I want to talk about that I believe will eradicate anxiety in your life. And I'm just going to give them to you up front. Number 1 is transform your mind. Number 2, transform your brain. Number 3, prayer. Number 4, power. Number 5, connection. And the foundation of all 5 of those things must be truth. So let's walk through these and talk about how they combined can actually allow you to overcome anxiety. Let's start with your mind. There is a reason why people who are successful always emphasize the power of your thoughts and how what you think and imagine impacts your reality. It's true for many reasons, one being that what you're thinking triggers your feelings. Right? So your thoughts are triggering your anxiety, and more often than not, you avoid what's triggering that feeling. So let's say, for example, you're supposed to be alone for a season of your life so that God can draw you nearer to Him and you can focus on your goals. But the fear of being alone or the fear of being left out, it causes you to avoid being in solitude. Therefore, you miss the opportunity for elevation and growth. Or let's say you're called to connect to people to help you with your ministry, but the fear of rejection creeps in and you never take that first step. because of that fear. Think about how many people are afraid to get on a stage because their thoughts are, what are they going to say? How am I going to do? Am I going to make a mistake? Will I be embarrassed? And they're missing out on the very thing that they were called to do. When you manage your thoughts, anxiety won't have anything to stand on. Now, how do you do this? You practice mindfulness. You address the underlying issue that has caused you to have, whether it's a pessimistic way of thinking, whether it's getting rid of extreme thoughts that causes you to think in black and white or to magnify things. You begin to monitor your thoughts by noticing patterns in your thinking when certain situations happen. You get angry whenever you're not appreciated, right? And anger oftentimes is a secondary emotion. So is there a fear underneath of that anger of maybe not being loved? Part of that process of managing your thoughts is getting to the root of what are my beliefs that are triggering those thoughts? Developing the skill of managing your thoughts, it takes time. But if you want to get rid of anxiety, you have to make that commitment. You see, you're not responsible for every thought that you have, but you are responsible for what you do with them. If you can learn to manage your thoughts and your imagination, you're 50% delivered, right? So number one, manage your thoughts. Next, you want to approach this with the right mindset, right? And this is another component of managing your thinking. It seems that most people approach anxiety from a place of defense. And I want to suggest that you strike before it strikes you. Go on offense. When you're constantly having to address it on the back end, you're usually addressing it because you're already dealing with the side effects. The delays, the procrastination, the consequences of overthinking, the paralysis, your heart is racing, you're having health issues. But the goal is to develop the skills and the atmosphere within you to prevent any type of anxiety from sticking around. And even if you're dealing with, and you've been dealing with anxiety all your life or even for a period of time, you can still shift from being reactive to proactive. In fact, when you do, you will feel empowered that you can have more control over what you're experiencing than you may actually realize. So go on the offense. Anxiety is something that you have to take personally. It's not something you want to just let happen to you. You have to take a stand for you and your future. By addressing this issue within you, it can actually prevent the next generation from having to deal with the same thing because anxiety can be hereditary. I think it's important for me to say this. Having anxiety, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, right? It affects everyone at some point in their life. But refusing to address it means there's something wrong with your mindset. You've likely heard this before, but actually think about, why is fear not mentioned 365 times in the Bible and the word fear over 500 times? It's because it's a significant part of the human experience. What are some of the solutions that we see in Philippians 4 to address anxiety? It tells you to rejoice, to pray, and to think in healthy ways. And if you've listened to my previous episodes, you know that it's not enough to just think about something once. And even more so, what ultimately matters is not so much just what you're thinking, it's what you believe. Because those thoughts that you're having, they are being produced oftentimes by your beliefs. So if your beliefs are saying bad things will always happen to you, only changing your thoughts is like putting a Band-Aid on an infected wound. The thoughts, they really won't go away completely until that belief is addressed. And it also mentions, rejoicing and praying, both of which changes the way you think. So you cannot address and combat anxiety without changing your thoughts. The good news is, as you improve your mindset and transform your beliefs, your brain automatically changes. For example, When your belief changes from I am not enough to I am enough, then you're no longer going to be triggered when those opportunities for you to start those new projects or stand in front of people come up. Your body won't resist you because there isn't a belief within you that is fearfully fighting to protect you from being exposed. Now, depending on the type of anxiety you're having, the transformation of the brain may also need to involve things like exposure and various processes that can allow you to reprocess negative memories and past experiences. So, for instance, telling yourself that dogs won't bite you often won't change your brain. You likely need to be exposed to dogs in a safe and controlled way. And through those experiences, as you begin to accept that, wow, it is possible to be in the presence of dogs and be safe, then your brain will make that correlation and replace those negative neural pathways with the new ones. And so you're no longer triggered. So what I like to recommend for you to do is after this episode, sit down and make a list of what are your triggers. What are the things that causes that fight or flight to kick in within you? What are the patterns in your life that once you're triggered, you then respond by doing this, or you react, or you avoid? Begin to just make note of what are your patterns. The brain is fascinating. Studies show that just by imagining something, the brain will begin to believe what you're imagining is happening in real life. So all those times you sat around imagining the worst case scenario and you spent time coming up with narratives about why that situation happened or why that person did what they did, your brain is actually embracing those narratives as truth. How do we know this? Because how did you feel when you started imagining those things? Did you notice how your body started to tense up? You began to feel angry. Fear or doubt maybe started to creep in. All of that happened because you let your imagination explore in unhealthy ways. How much of your anxiety is because of your imagination? Not because something bad is actually happening, but because you had time to sit and think without supervision. Yes, our minds need supervision. Have you embraced that responsibility yet? Now, the first two remedies are what you'll learn in therapy or through reading books on dealing with anxiety, right? So, managing your thoughts, how your brain is changed and transformed. And just by focusing on those two strategies alone, you can actually successfully manage anxiety for the rest of your life, okay? So if you want to stop here and that's sufficient for you, then great. I'm glad that you can at least have that information and that is helpful. However, is the goal to manage or is the goal to overcome? I want to transition now to the last three remedies. As you're transforming your mind, it needs to be grounded in the truth, which will create an atmosphere that anxiety cannot exist. So to do that, we're going to talk about the last three remedies, which are prayer, power, and connection. I'm not going to spend as much time on prayer in this episode, but let me say that 100% of the many things that I have been delivered from involved prayer. There was no changing in the physical without addressing the spiritual through prayer. If you don't have a strong prayer life, if you don't know how to war in the spirit, it's time to learn. Make that a priority. In fact, the next two that I'm going to discuss, it will not be effective without a healthy prayer life. So as you start working on the first two, have someone to cover you in prayer as you learn to pray yourself. But before I continue, I want to take a second and I just want to thank you for taking time to listen each week. It looks like many of you are getting something helpful from this content, and I just want to say, This is just the beginning. I'm preparing to wrap up season 1 after the next episode, and I'm so excited for what's to come in season 2. But please do me a favor, if you haven't already, subscribe and share this channel so that it can grow and prayerfully help someone that could benefit from this information. Thank you so much for all your support. Now, let's talk about power. Part of the reason that anxiety has power over us is because we aren't walking in the power that we've been ordained to walk in. Think about the last time you felt empowered by something or someone. How did it make you feel? What action steps did you take because of that feeling? I imagine that feeling led to you having a level of confidence and motivation that propelled you toward your goals. Well, the power we have from God through the Holy Spirit is more than a feeling. It's a truth that we have often ignored for more logical explanations of what God is doing in our life. I saw this video recently of a 7-year-old boy in British Columbia. He was riding his scooter in his neighborhood, and all of a sudden this big black bear started running towards him from out of nowhere. This bear gets to about 2 feet from where this boy is standing, and you can imagine what this boy would do next, right? But much to my surprise, he turned toward the bear, he stood tall, and stared the bear directly in its eyes. And what did the bear do? It just stopped and left. This is what power does in the face of fear. It stares it down until fear backs down. What gave him that confidence? Well, later in the video, the mom is interviewed, and she shared that she taught him how to be aware of his surroundings and to not run if a bear ever came up to him. So she gave him the insight and understanding he needed to know what to do. But he still had to apply that truth, apply that wisdom by faith in the moment. Power is released to you when you have the right knowledge and understanding of who God is and what He has given you. What you know about God, it might be too little to walk in the power that He desires for you to walk in. Or perhaps you know a lot, but you're not applying it every time that bear runs up on you. And often what will happen is that if you're not practicing on the bear head on, you miss an opportunity for promotion, because your promotion is going to come with even bigger giants, even bigger beasts. So it's important that we not just acknowledge and receive the power that God has given us, but that we actually use it when that fear presents itself. So if you want to use the power that God has released to you to stare down any fear that comes your way, grow in your understanding of who God is, of what He has given you, and apply it. I pray that God will release to you what you need in order to walk in the power and authority that He desires and has ordained for you to walk in. Now let's discuss connection next. It's so important that we never isolate when we're dealing with anxiety. One of the key strategies to help you to overcome anxiety is to connect yourself to those who are already walking in the authority and the power that you desire, who can impart into you what they have. Spiritual benefits are not just received directly from God, they are also transferred from a person who God has given them to. We've seen that with Elijah transferring what he had to Elijah, right? Paul talked about, his spiritual children being partakers of his faith. There are so many examples that we can look at. Have you ever noticed and paid attention in your own life that when you're around people who carry, let's say a grace for business, you begin to thrive in that same way? I noticed that whenever I was serving under someone who carried a certain grace, I too began to operate in that same grace, right? So it's helped my faith to grow. It's helped me to be a better leader. It's helped me to learn how to run a business. There's so many areas that have been added to me because of those that I've served under and those that I've been connected to. You see, when Isaiah 41:10 says, "To fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will help you. I will hold you with my righteous right hand." You need to walk with people who knows that God is with them, who isn't dismayed when trouble comes, but trust that God will help them through whatever is happening. When I allow people to connect to me, there are some benefits that they receive because of the grace that I carry. People are sometimes confused as to how are they delivered from various challenges because I don't often use, conventional ways in therapy. And my response is that there's always more happening beyond just our sessions, our physical time together. And that applies to those that you connect with. What grace do they carry? Understand that there is always more happening behind the scenes. And so this is also true when you disconnect from a person. Use wisdom, because how you leave a person impacts if you will continue to walk in the grace that you receive from them or if you will not, right? Connection is important. Now, I want to give you just one last bonus in addition to what has already been said. Remember, there is power in your words, whether that's praise or speaking life over yourself. It's not about what you see. It's always about what does God see. It's never about the facts. It's about what is true. When you choose to speak life over your situation, it's like you're taking a stand like that 7-year-old boy and you're staring that issue in the face. What guarantee did he have that that bear would stop? He didn't, but he had to make a choice. Would he stand there and focus on the facts that that bear was capable of killing him and, think about as it was running towards him, how could he protect himself and get away? Or would he react in truth? That the bear would back down if he calmly stood his ground. Will you react in fear or in power? Will you let your imagination run wild, causing you to take things in your own hands based on imaginary narratives? Or are you going to put those situations in God's hands where they belong? Are you going to take a stand regardless of what giant is in front of you? It's really not about how you feel. It's not about the facts, what degrees they have, what that doctor report says, what they're saying about you. It's what do you believe and what are you going to stand on? All right. You guys know what time it is now. This is the time where we get to discuss a phrase, a pattern, or belief that has been a hindrance to many in the culture. And if we eradicate it, it would improve your life, your family, and the community.
It's chain breaking time.
This week, the behavior pattern that I would like to address is avoiding conflict. Okay, so this is a tough one, but I'm just going to go for it. Conflict is life. Okay, if we define conflict as, when there is some form of disagreement or difference in outlooks, then we generally only think of people. But consider this. Consider that when a child is ready to come out of the womb, there's a conflict. That baby is comfortable where they are in that womb, but all the processes around that child, including the mother, is saying it's time to go, hence a conflict. So one side has to yield, and as a result, someone beautiful is birthed. There are many things in your life that was never birthed because you avoided conflict. Something special was supposed to come out of the two of you being together. Something transformational was supposed to come out of those two completely different groups coming together to work on one accord. Imagine if you choose to address that issue that you've been sweeping under the rug so that you and that person no longer has to constantly trip over each other. And now there's this sense of safety for you to interact freely and with love. Imagine how your life, your relationships will change. Address the issues at hand. It's not the person that you're addressing, it's the issue. And see what can be birthed through your unity, through you being on one accord. Trust me, there is something beautiful on the other side. Let me close with a word of encouragement. You will walk in the power and authority that has been given to you. You will be secure in who you are in Christ and in His love for you. You will have a sound mind and will not be easily shaken. I see you having the confidence to stare anxiety down until it submits. I see you being established in truth and no longer being bound to fear, doubt, shame, condemnation, or trauma. You have been set free indeed. Walk in your freedom. Until next time, shalom.